Imagine a world in which feelings, thoughts, and memories are not your enemy, even the ones you'd rather put to the side. Well, with me is Stephen Hayes, and his work for the last decades is exactly about that. Stephen has been trailing a very courageous, singular path in psychology for some decades now. He's been very influential in research and in clinical psychology, author of many articles and books, and particularly famous in developing acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. And from what we will hear, ACT, the main objective is to increase psychological flexibility. We'll talk a little bit about that. And the model itself, it's very ambitious, I think, because it draws from so many sources, from language, cognition, evolutionary psychology. So we're very happy to have this opportunity to chat with you, Steve.
I'm very, very happy to be here. And I was mentioning this before we started, that my wife's from Brazil, and we just spent a nice family vacation in Portugal. It's a very, very beautiful country. So both your language and country is in our home and in my heart. And it was not hard to persuade me to do this.
So like I said before, I hope we can kidnap you one time to come back and give us
Yes.
a workshop. So, I think as students starting out our career in psychology, we worry about making a difference in the field, both in clinical psychology and in the research setting. And you've written about this topic in the past, so it seems important for us to take this chance to talk a little bit about your early influences and challenges.
Sure.
So, you're part of a specific scientific tradition that owes a lot to behaviorism, and you've also been very influenced by Buddhism and other spiritual traditions. Can you tell us a little bit how these early influences came about and how that shaped the work you were interested in from the get-go?
I can, and maybe if I could start off with something even a little broader that you intimated in your question, which is, especially as we focus on students and you're thinking, oh, where does your education fit, and what is your career going to be? And my answer when people ask questions about that is always to remember that it's not just your head, it's also your heart, and the whole of you is going to be involved in your career path. And so finding ways to integrate the different things that you've done and also your personal experiences and the things you most deeply hope for, and connect that up to a values-based journey that's also an intellectual journey, also a journey as to how to help others if you're in the helping professions in an applied wing, is part of the task of being a student as you transition. And that's true in my earlier life as well, in the sense of coming myself as a student and then as a young professional to a career goal. And what you asked about specifically, putting together behavioral thinking and the more spiritual and wisdom traditions. I would not say so much Buddhism, but really I had a little bit of exposure to that as a child of the 60s, but more the mystical wing and the broader range of things. I went to a Jesuit Catholic college, and issues of spirituality and theology and so forth was important to me as a young person. And there's an example. Like, I came into psychology initially because of people like Maslow, and what I was attracted to there was the idea that we could come up with a psychology that would really make a difference positively and not just negatively, not just eliminating problems, but what kind of lives do we want to live, and issues of peak experiences and things of that kind were very much in my mind. I gravitated towards behaviorism as an undergraduate and then as a graduate student because it seemed to me, if you care about these big picture kinds of things of how we can organize our lives in a way that are good for the world and for the people that we love, and that promote us towards prosperity, not just eliminating problems and so forth, that we would have to bring Western science to those questions in order to contribute something new, because there's already many, many things in our wisdom traditions and our philosophy work and in the deeper clinical traditions that have claimed, even as Maslow and people like him, the humanistic tradition did, that we can aspire to great things. Yeah, but how do we get there? Maslow himself thought that you can't get there with traditional experimental science. Mm-hmm. You have to do it in a different way. Mm-hmm. Now, for more than 40 years later, I understand why he said that. I still disagree with it. Mm-hmm. And as a student, I was attracted to this bottom-up idea that, understanding principles and then bringing them into human complexity would give us a way forward. Mm-hmm. So, for example, why am I a behaviorist? It's a combination of two things, Walden 2, which is the aspirational. Yeah. Can we possibly, create a psychology that actually tells us something about how to organize our communities, our families, our businesses, our organizations, our schools? Wouldn't that be great? And, it wasn't Skinner was saying, I have the answer. He was saying, that's a good question. Mm-hmm. And it is a good question. Mm-hmm. And yet, in his experimental science, really getting these highly polished, precise tools that have broad scope. So I was attracted to a science that was precise and broad in scope, and a vision that was pushing the edges of the envelope. The thing that really brought that together for me, because in the training I had in graduate school and undergraduate, it was more on the experimental science, the behavioral science part of it, was the development of panic disorder. And so it was only when I faced challenges that I didn't know how to overcome, using what I knew from the early days of CBT and behavior therapy and behavior modification, behavior analysis. I'm talking now in the late 70s, early 80s. That I kind of went back to the well and looked at some things that I learned about as a child of the 60s and sitting on Hippie Hill and the Summer of Love, and I lived in California, and reading Watts and Suzuki and the human potential movement and Esalen and all the fruit nut seed mix of the counterculture. That when I turned back to that, I found some traction on my panic disorder, which I thought, man, this is very odd. I tell this story in a TED Talk, which, by the way, is going to be translated into Portuguese. We have a team working on it now. So by the time people see this, very likely they'll be able to get the subtitles. I'll give you the link. Perhaps you can put it up. But actually, if you'll permit me, if you put bit.ly, bit.ly, it's just bit.ly/Steves, you have to capitalize S. First, you have to capitalize the word first. And then TED, TED, all capitalized, no spaces. You'll see that talk. And I walk through this, the personal experience of what it's like to come to a point where you just can't function. I couldn't give lectures in undergraduate classes. I didn't want to ride elevators. I didn't like getting on the phone. I'd wake up in the night already in a full-blown panic. And it was only when I turned back towards some of the wisdom traditions and broader clinical traditions that I found some traction. But now here I've got these two strands. And what I just said at the beginning is think of yourself as a whole person. Take all these things that you're learning, try to put them together and connect it to your heart. And I'm thinking, man, if that applies to me, and then I tried it with my clients and it applied to them, these early works in what we now call ACT, I said, this is not something I should just run out and sort of say, here's a randomized trial. We did 3 randomized trials in the early 80s, early to mid. They all did really well. And then I only published one, but then I went on a 15-year silence where I tried to work out the basic science, even developed relational frame theory, the underlying theory of language and cognition. That's now a vibrant research program. So when I finally came back in 1999 and said, okay, here's ACT, and then at that time we had 3 randomized trials. We now are well past 200 with between 1,000 and 2,000 studies on the model and so forth, depending on how tightly you define it. That has happened because I kind of followed that advice myself of you're one whole person, put these things together and keep your eye on what you're trying to contribute. And I didn't think it was ready to run out the door with it. And I'm sorry for the long answer, but
no, it's great.
The short version is you need to be yourself and take all these different things that you've learned and that you hold dear and that you care about and find a way to harmonize them and bring them into the world in a way that makes a difference, the kind of difference you want to make. And that's what my career has been about, is doing that one step at a time, never rushing it, having faith that somehow or another the fates will give me enough time on the planet to do something this big.
Well, picking up on something you just said, there's a strand in your work that I find very interesting, is that even when you dabble into an area that could sometimes be criticized as anti-scientific, you actually look at the process that is working there.
Yeah.
You know, there's something very interesting that I know many colleagues, especially from the behavior and cognitive behavior side, that in a way, you know, they get caught up in this, well, if it comes from these traditions, you know, it comes entangled with all of this other stuff that we don't want.
Yeah.
But then, you know, I usually say, well, but if it works, there's something there. So like,
Exactly.
like you're saying, you know, okay, I had to go back to that area, but something there clicked. So there's a process there, a psychological process.
Yeah, exactly. You have to live inside the ambiguity of, I don't know exactly how it fits. I haven't figured that out yet. And I'm not going to make that leap of resolving the ambiguity by saying, oh my, you know, the humanists are right, even if they don't need data for it. No, I'm not going to say that.
Mm-hmm.
The Freudians were right. No, I'm not going to say that.
Mm-hmm.
Or the monks were right. I'm not going to say that. But I am going to treat it with respect.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to genuflect, though. If I'm wearing my science hat,
Yeah.
it has to pass our tests.
Yeah.
And we can pull it at the joints. You know, nobody gets to say, well, I'm part of the Sangha, the tradition, the Dharma, the blah, 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 and therefore, no.
Yeah.
No. Not with my science hat on.
Yeah.
Because I don't genuflect in front of anybody with my science hat on. Not out of disrespect for them, but out of respect for what science is. So you have to kind of balance both things and then allow this longer journey that doesn't happen fast of, well, then how do they fit together?
Mm-hmm.
So the very first paper on ACT is 1984. It's called Making Sense of Spirituality.
Yeah.
It's the first paper on RFT, too. And it's basically saying you can't take something like spirituality that is so fundamental to so many people on the planet and say, oh, that's just blah, blah, and give oh, that's just reinforcement or something. Just shut up. That's not right.
Yeah.
What is it? But on the one hand, on the other hand, you don't go like, oh, it's all about spirituality, you know, heck with science.
Yeah.
Well, you can do it if you want. It's fine if people want to do it.
Uh-huh.
But you've added nothing because there's already a lot of people saying that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people dismissing. What's in the middle? Where, you know, you take the phenomena very seriously, but you keep your powder dry, and you keep trying to analyze and dig in and do the science and create the measures and maybe not assuming that there's something there. I don't know if something's there. It's just that the way I say it is, if you came to a clearing in a forest and there were many pathways there, maybe there's something in that clearing that's important. And maybe we don't have to quarrel so much about, only this pathway to the clearing is important.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's away with fundamentalism.
It's a kind of there's an arrogance inside our traditions that, you know, it's my way or the highway, and my particular pathway is the only way, and it's disrespectful of the human condition, in my opinion. There's many voices here to listen to. Yeah.
Well, picking up on what you're saying, because I know we've talked in the past about your colleagues criticizing your broad research interests, implying that if you were a serious researcher, you should focus on only one topic.
Yes.
Well, I assume that you had your own worries of how to pull all these influences into a cohesive whole. And, you know, what are your advice and cautions for us stubborn students that also seem to have too many interests?
Yeah, you know, this, I tell, of course, I have in this situation with my students many times. And I do tell them, you know, get a line, get a track, get something you're known for. But I also say, keep your eyes wide, keep your interests open. You know, I'm writing a book right now on psychological flexibility, a popular book, and as part of that, I'm trying to tell my own biographical story. So I can go back and I looked at one of my evaluations when I'd been in the academy. I've been a faculty member for, I think, about 5 or 6 years, and the evaluation was horrible. I'm just dreadful. I got no raises. I got no raises for years. This year after year, no raises. No, you're at the very bottom. And they would say things like, you're a dilettante. You know, nobody who has serious interests in science would do this. Mm. And there was a part of me that just said, okay, you might be right, but I'm interested in these things. Yeah. I don't know how they fit together. It wasn't like, what I'm saying now is, like, oh, you have to look to see how they fit together. Even that thought was kind of not fully there. It was more like, I care about this and I care about that, and I'm just going to live inside the fact that I care about both and I don't know how to put them together.
Yeah.
But I hope I kind of can figure it out. But I didn't have a vision for. Now the way I retell the story, it sounds like I waited before the science was ready, and then it wasn't quite like that when it was lived.
Yeah.
When it was lived, like I had the sense it's not ready, and I had the sense that I'm interested in this and I'm interested in that, and my life tells the story that apparently I had the faith that they'd eventually come together, and they did come together. Now to my students, I usually say, get a drumbeat going of something that you care about that can kick things off regularly and gives you a line, that gives you visibility, gives you a reputation. But I also say, don't narrow your vision if your heart is broad and your interests are broad too quickly and too easily. Because the history of science very often says that creative things happen not because you're some brilliant creative person like you sprung forth from the head of Zeus, but because when you have different things that your heart and head cares about, it gives you material for thinking about things in a different way.
Yeah.
And so have faith that what you care about is important. And maybe it will come together. But yes, protect yourself as a student and as a young faculty member by developing areas of expertise and things you can say easily. But, some of the things that have happened, and this is very much the story of CBT and the evidence-based therapies, if you look at where we are now versus 15 years ago, most of the creative and new things have come from the surprising sources, sometimes the wisdom traditions, for example. But not just that, sometimes it's surprising that you take something like behavioral activation. I mean, that dog knows how to hunt. I mean, who would have thought that you'd go back to just this very simple message and you could actually beat full CBT with the most severe depressed people in randomized trials and in component analyses? I believe those data. I believe the 2 Jacobson studies. And it's shocking, I think, not just to me, and I'm a behaviorist. I'm glad to see it. But I think to many in the field, it's almost disorienting. Like, how could that be? Well, learn from that. Learn from that and be more humble. And, let the data guide you. And one of the things we know about the history of science is that all of our theories are wrong. All of them. Because any area of mature science, given enough time, every single theory is proved to be wrong. We just don't know where it's wrong. So we need humility of some of our ideas are good and some are not good, and let's let it unfold over time. Some of it will probably even go past your lifetime. You don't get to be there to see all these things worked out. And it's a story that doesn't end, so it keeps going. But I hope that gives a bit of an answer. Stay true to yourself, stay broad, but also protect yourself by developing areas of expertise. You don't want to, if you're a new academic, to do what I did, risking your tenure and your career by being so stubborn to just say, I don't care, I like it.
Well, for people interested in your work, I usually recommend, I'm always lending the ACT handbook. It's now on the 2nd edition. But some of my friends felt that it was, too much too soon. And I've actually been advising them to start watching your recent TED Talk that you were talking about.
Yes.
We'll link that. And I think some people were actually surprised that it was a lot more autobiographical than they would expect.
Yes.
I saw a friend of mine that I thought it was going to be like a science thing. And then it's like, but this is mixed. What is this? And, I have this feeling, and I'd like to ask you about it. Did that feel in any way like a culmination of your work?
In a way, it's I was saying to somebody yesterday, they were asking, are you happy with the TED Talk? Do you think? And I say, here's what I feel. I feel as though I've finished something. It isn't the science journey that I've finished. It's the personal connection to my autobiography. And of course, my life is still being written, and new chapters are being written. But telling the story of some of these early chapters and saying, this is what it was like, and telling it in a way that puts everything that I have out there, like holding nothing back.
Yeah.
And if you see the TED Talk, you'll see what I mean by that.
Yeah, of course.
I mentioned that I'm writing a popular book, and I was meeting with publishers here just a week or so ago to see if they would be interested in it. And almost everybody had looked at the TED Talk. And one team was kind of very enthusiastic and stuff, but I said, have you seen it? And I said, yes. And the publisher said, but I thought either this person is a very good actor or this is real. And I said, and I can tell in the first 3 minutes of talking to you, this is real. Mm-hmm. And I tried to do the talk that way. If you actually see the talk, you'll see that there's a scream that I give out when I sort of hit bottom inside my panic disorder. I didn't tell the story, but I'd only given that scream once before when I was caught in a machine in an aluminum factory where I was working as a young adult. I think I was 20 years old when this happened. And I was almost chopped in two. I still have a dent in my leg from it because it separated my muscles and before the bones started being crushed, and I was going to be literally chopped in two. They heard me screaming and turned off the machine because I was way down inside this thing that was big as a house. Nobody could see me, but they heard that scream. When I was practicing the TED Talk, I refused to do the scream. I just would not practice it. I said, I'm going to do this one time and one time only because it's almost a sacred space, to hit something that bad. And so I've tried to put something in that talk in the world where I've used my own story as scaffolding for the simple core of what 1,000 studies show about psychological flexibility, which is if you find a way, and based on our basic science of RFT and so forth, we know some of how hard this is and some of how to do this. But if you can find a way to be able to look at your thoughts with a little set of psychological distance, with openness and curiosity, and to open up to your own emotions, sensations, memories, bodily sensations. If you can do that with sort of eyes wide, open and arms wide, metaphorically, that empowers you to then come into the world within and without with a more flexible attention and with a sense of consciousness that allows you to pivot towards what you most deeply care about, the qualities of being and doing you want to bring into the world, and how to build your life around that. I've just said the 6 processes in psychological flexibility. You've read the books, and you probably recognize them. Those who are just listening and haven't read the books, they probably have a sense from that pretty long sentence or short paragraph. Okay, I get it. You turn towards pain and suffering so that you can be more present and conscious and flexible in your attention, and then you can turn that towards meaning and purpose and do what brings meaning and purpose to your life and to others. It turns out that research story, which took a long time, that was a long journey to get to something where you could say it in a short paragraph, goes everywhere that a human mind goes. And it's shocking how often these processes are central to things like, are you going to be a good parent, or are you going to succeed at work, or can you do something creative, or will you develop a mental health disorder, or do you have a substance abuse problem, or can you stop smoking, or can you stick to your diet, or can you lose weight, or it's just everywhere. And it isn't because everything is a nail if all you have is a hammer. And it's not all there is. It isn't all there is. But it's a big chunk. It's the 5 or 10% that does the 70 or 80%. And science can give you that. See, the wisdom traditions can't give you that because there's no filter. The humanistic, existential, and analytic traditions, if they don't have experimental science on their side, it's very hard for them to not mix in things that are irrelevant, but they think are true, with things that are profoundly true that are already in their traditions. Yeah. And so the way I say it is we've sort of ended up with this very basic process-oriented science journey in a clearing, and then there in the clearing there's monks over there, and there's deep clinical traditions over there, and there's a lot of people in this clearing. Yeah. But I'm just glad that we're here now as the behavior analytic, for goodness sakes, reframed, redone, taking cognition very seriously. We're not just animal learners. Because we're doing something new here. I mean, we're talking and listening. That's something new. So this TED used the scaffolding of my personal story so that I could reach people. And I even did this, if you see the talk. I mean, the behavior analysts must just be scratching themselves. Has he completely lost it? I gave a word for the whole psychological flexibility model because a short paragraph is still not simple enough for just normal people, in my opinion. And the word I came to was love. A certain kind of love. It's not romantic love. It's not deep friendship. It's, the eudaimonia of openness, and of openness even to caring and values as a kind of form of happiness. And if you see the talk, it might make sense to you why I would use that word. But to come back to your deeper question, why was it so personal? Because last time I checked, scientists are people too. Clinicians are people too. Our clients are people. And I understand the value of Western science. I understand the value of take one step back, be skeptical, develop highly polished principles. I've proven with my life and my career that I'm willing to invest silence for years on end before I develop things that will pass that test. But no, with respect, I'm not going to abandon the heart of the matter. Yeah. So I say it this way: head, hands, and heart. You need the head, you need the analysis and the principles. You need the hands, you need the techniques and the methods. But of the three, if you lose the heart, you've lost your way. And sometimes Western science and more skeptical, critical, scientific traditions have been so dismissive of the heart of it that they've, made it seem like practitioners in science need to be almost science robots in order to do good in the world. And I, with respect, I deny that. Yeah. My life denies that. When I was in deep need, my life denies that. And so I'm just not going to stand up and say, yes, dry, this is just, minimization, reductionism. Mm-hmm. No. I stand up and say, no. Yeah. There's something that happens at the level of human complexity that will always be a little bit beyond our grasp scientifically. So can we come into that with a humbler attempt to try to grasp at the heart of the matter and bring our own caring values, emotions, memories, thoughts, families, people we love, our pro-social instincts into laboratory-based, bottom-up, analytic, tough as nails scientific thinking? Wouldn't that be cool if we could do both and then bring it into the healthcare system and into our schools and communities?
Sounds
that would
great
be awesome.
To me. Well, it's interesting you're saying that, because even the more, down to the nail process examination, the heart, or let's call it the emotions at least, have been the last frontier in a way. Only in the last 20 or 30 years have we really been trying to get a good emotion theory going. We know a lot about theory of behavior and cognition, but emotions not so much. In the 90s, emotion-focused therapy came along. It helped a little. And I really think that also your work helped a little. And I'd like to jump into making this connection now.
Sure.
ACT has for a long time, existed for a long time, and your CBT colleagues may at first have argued against some stuff that they have actually incorporated with time.
Yes.
Things like the acceptance processes, the experiential avoidance. They may call it something else, but it's there in the work now. So, but I still see you having friendly fights with people like Stephen Hoffman. And you actually wrote a preface, I think, to a recent book about emotion in psychotherapy for Stefan. And
I did.
I'd like to ask you, what do you think in 2016 still greatly distinguishes ACT from the contemporary CBT views?
Well, CBT is sprinting in the direction of the so-called third wave methods. Why? Because the data are there, and CBT is a data-oriented tradition. Stefan is a good example. Stefan wrote a meta-analysis of mindfulness-based therapies and processes and outcomes. He has a large grant on yoga and its use. He has arm wrestled with me very publicly and sometimes very critically. This is just old wine in new bottles and so forth. I don't think he'd say that now. Mm-hmm. But part of what I did is I reached out to Stefan and I invited him to come to ACBS to give us criticism, yes, but also come into dialogue with us. Let's talk, because there's a little bit of truth there and let's live inside even that ambiguity of not just, third wave, but also second wave and the first wave. I mean, and I wrote a paper on this, 2004, my presidential address at ABCT, and what I said and what I meant, it isn't what people heard, but what I meant and what I said was that we are not here to tear down the second wave or the first wave, but to stand on the shoulders of giants and to move it forward. And people might be surprised to know that Stefan and I are now writing a book together.
Ah.
I have conversations with Stefan every week. I'll have him tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. for an hour. He is literally, one of my very best friends in the world. And we're building an alliance. We still disagree.
Yeah.
We still disagree. But that's fine.
It's part
that's
of it.
fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. And we will work it out.
Yeah.
And here's what we do agree on. And it comes back to your question. We need to move into a new era in CBT, if that's even the word that will be used long run, of process-oriented evidence-based therapy, where we really move away from protocols for syndromes. This is a very foreign intrusion into psychological thinking. This is a wing of psychiatry imposing its structure on us.
Yeah.
And it helped with our research. And for a while, NIMH and the other funding agencies around the world applauded and so forth. But after those billions were spent, we developed some evidence-based therapies. That's good. But did we find the diseases that are inside these syndromes? Did we find the functional units that the whole purpose of syndrome thinking is designed to get to in medical thinking and other areas? No, we didn't.
Yeah.
And now the funders are saying, at least in the U.S., we don't want those studies anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, the same agencies that created it are now saying we're done.
They found out.
Now, what they're saying, go ahead.
Yeah, they found out that not only did the outcomes not get a lot better, you didn't find out the processes underlying.
Yes. I mean, you could accept, some of these things have broad implications. Maybe the outcomes don't. You could accept that, but you cannot accept that you're not learning about what the processes are. That's what syndromes are for. Syndromes are there to orient you towards the process of discovering etiology, process, and outcome. And if it doesn't give you that, and in other areas of physical medicine, sometimes it hasn't. I mean, I'll give you an example, cancer. Yeah. I mean, I'm old enough to remember where the only thing they knew about cancer were all the names for the different manifestations. But, eventually, as they're pouring billions into it, they basically say, gee, botanizing cancer isn't giving us anything. Yeah. It's giving us about as much as it gave us in botany. And it wasn't until we understand something about the genetics of plants that we could get beyond the blue-petaled ones and the pink-petaled ones, and enough already, the 5 petals, the 4 petals. Uh-huh. I mean, we've done the same thing with human suffering. We botanized human suffering. It didn't lead to the processes. And it was only when the folks got in the lab that they started figuring about oncogenes, or not just that, they figured about the epigenetic regulation of cell growth. I mean, and the farther down it goes, the more we realize of how elegant and complex and how much things like cancer is an interaction between our biological history and our current history, between cells as systems for turning environment and behavior into biology, that we've learned how foolish botanizing cancer was. Yeah. Well, now we're doing the same things with human suffering. It was a foolish agenda. Only because we did it that we learned it was foolish. I don't blame people for thinking that was the way to get progress. Yeah. I do think we hung on to it too long.
And there was, of course, a societal pressure. You
there
won't get funding if you did a specific type of research.
Exactly, and we were bought off, and we allowed ourselves to be bought off, and it built our science. It's fine, in a way. But now, by the way, we have a big cultural mess to clean up. We have a couple decades of, whoops, we made a mistake. Yeah. Because the syndromization of human suffering is in the pill-taking of your sister. Yeah. I mean, it's everywhere. I mean, if you're not sleeping, it's everywhere. Yeah. To the point that if you catch fish in U.S. rivers, they have antidepressants in them. Yeah. Because they can't filter it out of the sewage systems.
So linking this to your work, it means that we can't learn with the experience because we're taking away the experience in a way.
Yeah, well, so we need to learn from this journey we've been on, and part of what we need to learn is processes over protocols.
Yeah.
And in CBT, where we did protocols first, processes second, it took us a long time to realize that the cognitive model, the traditional cognitive model, is just mostly wrong. It's wrong. And in fact, now we're learning some of the mediators of traditional CBT are psychological flexibility. Very nice outcomes, very nice studies, big studies, well done. Now, I'm not going to chest thump about that. I'm just saying I came out of a wing, the behavior analytic wing, that always said processes first.
Yeah.
You can take courses in behavioral principles. There's not many courses on cognitive principles.
Yeah.
Where's those courses? It's cognitive theories, cognitive models, not principles.
Yeah.
Well, so you asked me, and excuse me for the long rant, but where are we now with CBT and ACT? The methods of ACT and even some of the measures and models, and not just of ACT, but of the larger range of things in MBCT and DBT, and FAP and all the rest, have been pulled in. You mentioned some, there's others. Values, for example. Attentional flexibility is there. Transcendent sense of self is not yet fully there, but it's in some of the meditation-oriented and mindfulness methods. Some of the methods, diffusion, values work, etc., haven't been there and are not fully in yet. I don't know many CBT protocols that are having people do word repetition as a way of helping people see languaging and flight and get a little distance and separation so they can make some choices. But now one of the things that is not in mainstream CBT but is in contextual behavioral science is this reticulated, contextual, bridge building, evolutionary science plus contextual behavioral processes tradition. If you were to come to a WorldCon, you'll see basic scientists there, very basic scientists. You'll see world-famous biologists there. You'll see policymakers there. You'll see prevention scientists there. You're going to see philosophers of philosophy of science sessions. You're going to see line clinicians there. And by the way, the clinicians are not just psychology. They're going to be in social work. They're going to be in psychiatry. They're going to be in counseling guidance. They're going to be in OT, PT. And the nurses will be there. But what we've done is we've built a community around a knowledge development strategy that is not so geeky that just normal folks can't be part of it. And that didn't exist in the planet quite that way. The closest was behavior analysis. But behavior analysis got cut in a cul-de-sac of Skinner was right. That's a bad idea. I hope if anybody ever starts saying Steve was right, that they just slap him. Please, if you see this some years hence and I'm not here, please slap them for me. Because everything we're saying is wrong. We just don't know how it's wrong yet. So a quick answer to your question is, we are pushing the envelope. If you were to come to a WorldCon, you're not going to just see ACT. You're going to see compassion-focused therapy. You're going to see FAP. But not just clinical techniques. You're going to see how do we reach groups in Africa to create more pro-social processes that make use of psychological flexibility, but not just that, of the evolution science principles that explain how groups work together well. You're not going to see that at ABCT. You're just not going to see it. You're not going to see it in the journals. You're not going to see it at the conference. And it's fine. I'm not trying to say what they're doing is wrong. I'm just trying to say we're fellow travelers. And I want to work, and I am with like Stefan and so forth. I want to. But I'm also writing a book with David Sloan Wilson, the evolutionary biologist, because I think the wisdom traditions, the deeper clinical traditions, now CBT and behavior analysis and evolutionary biology all have a voice if what you want to do is something as bold as what the motto is of ACBS, which is creating a psychology more worthy of the challenge of the human condition. We're not declaring that we've done that. This is not narcissism.
It's the mission.
This is a lighthouse in the distance. That's the goal. That's what we came here to do. Can we create a community that has the humility to do it one step at a time and the heart to believe that it's worth trying, that this journey is worth our life's energy. And if that resonates somehow, if people hear this and they think, that's not crazy, that's something I would like to do, then they'll enjoy being part of the ACT community in its in this intellectual side. If they just want to take advantage of ACT, actually, frankly, you're right. Eventually, I think 5 or 10 years from now, it's going to be so mainstream. People going, boring, heard it, done it.
Which would be great.
Yeah, well, I tell people, sometimes they get grabby and say, oh, they've renamed it, they've changed it, they're using different words for the same thing we were saying. I say, settle down. A, that's how change happens. B, all of us die and we'll be forgotten.
Yeah.
So stop grabbing at this, my words, my label, my methods, me. Bring it into the human community and let it go where it goes. And as long as where it goes is serving others, that's wonderful. And if they don't know that it came from you, so what? Eventually you're going to be forgotten anyway. So you might as well get used to it.
Steve, it's great because you've covered so many of the questions that I actually had to you.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm going to zoom in on just one of the things you say, because specifically, you're very integrative, not maybe in the integrative psychotherapy usual sense, but in the broader context of sciences. Yeah. And there is a particular one that has been very ambivalent, I think, for many people, which is neuroscience. Yes. Which has become particularly popular as a field of research. And, at least in Portugal, there's a move for more of that in the degrees of psychology. And I suppose it does give off the impression of better science, but at the same time I worry that it could give the false message that psychopathology is just a brain disease in a way, where we know that there's no specific marker for things like depression and stuff like that. So, do you think we've gained anything valuable for psychotherapy through neuroscience? And what are the cautions you give for us students that are being pulled into this, come study this is real science?
Oh, I think there's some significant gains, but I don't think the gains are going to be fully felt until it gets into an even broader discussion about the role of behavior and learning and environment in biology, which is part of what that discussion is about with neuroscience. And the danger is reductionism. Yeah. It's the brain as an independent variable. The brain is not an independent variable. It's part of a system, and it's more useful to think of it as a dependent variable than as an independent variable, because that's what neuroplasticity says. Yeah. That's what epigenetic regulation of the processes that lead to neural growth say. So, or just practice. I mean, I'll give an example. People were a little surprised when it was published in Stroke, the journal Stroke, about 10 years ago, that if you have a stroke and you tie down the useful non-dominant limb and literally refuse to allow it to be used, so now the patient has to use the limb that they have a hard time using because of the stroke, eventually they get pretty good at it. And the areas of the brain that where the insult occur grow to accomplish that. It's a plastic organ. It's a dependent variable. Yeah. Don't tell me. Yes, of course. There we have an example. There's a stroke. You can actually say, you can put them in the fMRI. You know exactly where the lesion is. It's not like the old days where you just give them, kind of weird cognitive tests and have to guess from. You can actually drill down sometimes and you know exactly what the biological damage was that happened there. Yes, but the brain is also changing with experience. And that's there in rehab. But it's not just there. It's in our conversation right now. But it's not just there. It's in psychotherapy. Yeah. So what I like about neuroscience is when they get contextual and developmental. When they use brain changes, for example, as a measure of how does psychotherapy work. Yeah. And if they can keep their powder dry about this causal language, because mediators are not causes, they're functional pathways. There's too many other parts of systems. There's too many other third, fourth, fifth, and 10th variables to call it a cause. Then it really helps to know, for example, that the emotion centers of the brain respond differently to different psychotherapies that are equally successful. Or, for example, if you suppress memories, you suppress emotions, if you're avoidant, if you're put in I'll give you two examples coming out of things that relate to psychological flexibility. If you're put in an avoidance task, you get heavily lateralized neurobiological functioning that looks like you're avoiding the emotional results as a process of following a verbal rule, okay, which is something we claimed long ago. You can see the verbal centers of the brain light up in the highly experientially avoidant people when they try to avoid difficult outcomes in ways that less experientially avoidant folks don't light up in the same way. But here's another one. If you suppress and you avoid, let's say, and now I give you a new task to remember. A recent piece showed, and that there's underlying neurobiological evidence to sort of explain it, you now dumb down your ability to learn anything. You start, because it doesn't just shut down the systems that are focused on that specific memory. It starts shutting down the systems that lay down memories. So you become stupider by the minute. And you can actually see it in the failure, for example, of highly experientially avoidant depressed people. We know have these great limitations in autobiographical memory. Everything's vague, you can't tie it down, they can't link it to a time. Well, this is what happens when you engage in that. So your brain is part of a system as a dependent variable that's lining up with these psychological and behavioral variables. So what does the neuroscience give you? It gives you scope. If you have highly refined principles that have this broad scope, you can sort of see it. And then the second thing it gives you that's even more important, it gives you depth. There shouldn't be anything happening in the brain that fundamentally contradicts what we know at the level of behavior. And if there is, there's something wrong, because we're one integrated biochemical organism. So scope and depth. You can have great precision in your principles, but you have to apply to many things, and they have to link across levels of analysis. Now, what I worry about is the brain made me do it. I'm like this because of my brain. In order to change my brain, I have to take chemicals. I was in a meeting with the head of a $1 billion federal agency in which I was very heavily actively involved. I won't remember name the agency or the name of the person because I don't want to shame them. But at one point in the conversation, the person started saying, medications need a lower standard of evidence than psychotherapy. This is the head of a major $1 billion research agency, okay? And I'm horrified. Mm-hmm. And I say, what? And here's what is said. If we agree that mental illness is a brain disease, it has to be treated with medications. Like, that's one of the stupidest things I ever heard out of anybody's mouth. If you're my student, you get an F.
But suddenly it made sense our problem.
You're the head of a gigantic agency with a PhD. And you're controlling thousands of staff persons. And I couldn't say it out loud that way. But what I did say is something like, that's not true, because we know that what we're doing right now in this conversation is changing the brain that may be like that for years going forward. So, my God, to turn this thing into a one-headed, one-directional arrow from brain to behavior is ignorant. It's stupid. And I say it with such harsh words because we have data that disprove it. Mm-hmm. It's a fact. That it's wrong. Okay? It's a scientific falsehood. Yeah. Plus, it creates problems. For example, clients who believe that they have a brain disease are less interested in psychotherapy. They're more interested in medications. They're they're less hopeful about their future. If their family hears it, they're less understanding of the clients. If you hear it about your friends, you're less interested in being friends with them. Think about what we're putting into the world with this cartoon biology. That's not real biology, it's cartoon biology. Now, why am I working with evolutionists, etc.? Because if you ask any neuroscientist, where did the brain come from? They'll say it evolved that way. And it turns out evolution has given us elaborate systems in moment to moment to regulate, up and down regulate gene expression. And that's exactly how neural growth and so forth is regulated. These cells carry the DNA. It's the same DNA as every cell, but you're turning off and on particular genes to accomplish things. And so there's another foot to fall that's ahead of where we are in terms of the great increase in neuroscience, which is an increase in the interest in the dynamic systems that evolved to control our biology, that interact with our behavior and environment. And when we understand ourselves as a whole system, biology will have a big, important place, but it's not going to be one-headed arrows coming out of biology. It's going to be double-headed arrows everywhere you look. And I know that that's overwhelming in a way, but it's not very far away. We can measure our full epigenome right now, and it's not that expensive. And you can show that psychotherapy is regulating your epigenome in, well, here's an example. 8 weeks of meditation, 12% of your genes are reliably turned on or off, and we know that it's due to processes like methylation, well, which alters gene expression. That 12% of your biology is like having a different great-grandparent from 8 weeks of meditation.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's just one example.
Talk about plasticity.
Yes, and it'll be expressed in neuroplasticity, but not just that. It's going to be expressed in how you respond in terms of your endocrine system.
Yeah.
Don't just be putting biology in the brain. Don't put a brain in a jar and call that a person. It's one whole person. And the entire system, I mean, some of your learning and memory is in your fingers and toes. You can play a piano piece so fast, Flight of the Bumblebee, that you literally know the next note before your brain even realized you played the last note. You know, the things we're doing right now are altering massively your entire system. You know, and your stress hormones and, you know, how the gut biome is working and, you know, what's going on in your digestive system. So we've got a big, big scientist project here, and it turns out the behavioral scientists have gone from the weak sister who barely belong at the table, maybe they're not even scientists at all, to it turns out, no, we are part of the scaffolding of evolution. We drive phenotypic development. The reason why there was the Cambrian explosion in species was because of learning. And we have a seat at the table with the evolutionary medicine folks, with the cancer folks, with the psychotherapists, of course. And neuroscience has a seat at the table too, but with all due respect, I'm not genuflecting in front of the neuroscientists. I want to work with them. I'm doing high-density EEG studies right now, etc. I want to work with them, but only as part of a contextual, functional, deep, systemic understanding, which is going to take 100 years, 200 years, going to take all of us to figure out this, but you can see it from here. It's no longer just a fantasy that learning and behavior are fundamental in changing how bodies respond and species evolve.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've talked so much about research, and, I think you covered a little bit about our worries as young psychologists to make a difference in research.
Yeah.
I'd just like to finish off with the other side, which is making a difference as psychotherapists.
Yes.
So, evidence has been coming to light that not all training and supervision produces better outcomes, duh.
Yes.
But your work suggests that, book-based knowledge just by itself won't create effective therapists. And that training should have like an experiential work based to it. So, I would like to know your opinion on what would constitute for you good principles of training effective therapists.
Yeah. It's an active area of research, and it's a wonderful one. I'm thankful that the ACBS community has about 15 or 20 studies right in this area. And so we're trying to take this issue of how do we train seriously. We have the advantage of just having to stumbled upon something which appears to be a broad applicability to training, not just in psychotherapy, but in education or in businesses and industry and so forth. And with a basic science of relational framing, which it turns out is also now helping to understand some of how intellectual development works, how developing a sense of self, empathy, things of that work. So that you didn't ask this question, and I'll only wave at it. But in randomized trials, we can use RFT to raise your IQ by about 15 points in about 6 months. We can establish the sense of self with children who don't have it. We can, help measure your implicit reactions to cognitive categories, etc. So we come to the table with a lot of things because of the breadth of the research program in answering what is not just a research question, but is a heart question, which is how do we empower clinicians to do this very hard work of listening to human misery over and over again in a way that doesn't lead to burnout, that it supports a professional engagement, sense of personal accomplishment, and that leads to more effective outcomes. One of the things that we've learned is that these more effective outcomes come from your flexibility, your psychological flexibility, your willingness to model and support processes that are helpful for people. If you can't go into dark spaces yourself, it's very hard to ask your clients to do it, because sooner or later they will go in a place. The analysts have said this for a long time, countertransference, of course. They'll go into a place that is hard for you to go. That doesn't mean you have to be the master of flexibility. You just have to know that it's important and catch it when it's hard and use the same methods with yourself and walk together as part of the therapeutic relationship. So when we train ACT, we start from the inside out. We do personal work on your own vulnerabilities, your own pain, your own chatter, your own entanglement. We try to bring people into the now more flexibly and then connect with the deepest values you have for your professional work and organizing learning around that. Turns out that does lead to better learning. People become more effective students. They learn better. And it also leads to better outcomes. We have some data suggesting that people are able to master ACT methods better if they've worked on their own personal psychological flexibility. We know that supervision done with a specific focus on the psychological flexibility of the supervision team helps people acquire methods that aren't even ACT. If you want to teach people, for example, a study 𝗔𝗹𝗲𝘅 did, let's say group psychotherapy for addiction, and we have a protocol for doing that, it's not ACT. Turns out that walking people through those processes experientially and in supervision helps them learn this technology, not because they're imposing ACT on it, but because they themselves are using ACT principles to learn and apply the methods. We have a trial that's a randomized trial that's not yet published out of my lab. I have some problems with the team in terms of getting it written up. It's going to be hard to get it out the door. A person who was working on it is now in a different place in his or her life. But where we've shown that ACT workshops, before you get training in motivational interviewing, makes you a better motivational interviewer, but not because you're putting ACT processes in motivational interviewing. We have a study showing that people are more willing to listen to the science of substance abuse and to apply those methods even if they disagree with them or it's hard for them personally. Like, for example, people who are in recovery suggesting that maybe agonists and antagonists might be helpful to a person who's addicted, which the science is very, very clear on. It is true. And even if it was not your personal journey and a drug counselor, it's part of your professional responsibility to support your clients in using evidence-based care. We have a randomized trial showing that you get about a 50% increase in the willingness of clinicians to recommend and to support evidence-based methods that they themselves didn't follow when it was their problem of addiction they were dealing with. So a final thing I'll mention, we know that psychologically flexible relationships give you high working alliance scores, and they predict outcomes the same way that the working alliance and therapeutic relationship does. But if you put them into multiple mediator models, the psychological flexibility of your clients that you model, instigate, and support, the changes there pull the variance out of the working alliance. Does that mean the working alliance is not important? The therapeutic relationship is not important? I say no. What it tells us is it's important because psychologically flexible relationships, ones that are accepting, are inherently healthy. Getting in there and doing in psychotherapy something that's accepting, non-judgmental, flexibly attending to the now as two conscious human beings where each person's values matter and we can be together in flexible ways in order to accomplish those valued purposes. I just said the 6 flexibility processes. So powerful working alliances are psychologically flexible relationships. Well, that's important because there's lots of people saying, hey, you have to have a good therapeutic relationship. And yeah, but they don't tell you how to do it.
Yeah.
And when I do in workshops, I say, how many people believe that's true? Everybody raise their hand. How many people believe you can get pretty good working alliances, you yourself? Mm-hmm. Almost everybody raises their hand. Yeah. I say half of you have to be wrong. Mm-hmm. Because unless you're not other than a random sample, and maybe that's possible, maybe the people coming back to workshops are remarkable, but I think it's more of a random sample. Clinicians don't know. Yeah. When they're really creating power, and half have to be below average. That's statistically required. Yeah. That's what average means. So the deeper message, I suppose, is that we need to train in a way that brings what we're learning in psychotherapy and behavioral science into the training environment. And it's inconsistent if you say to your clients, you need to open up to your emotions. You need to find a way to link with that experiential. It's not all rule-based. It has to be experiential. Rules have a role, but harness them to your values. Be more emotionally open. Live inside some ambiguity. To say that and then turn around and in your psychotherapy training, it's here are the 10 rules as to how to do it. And we're not even going to shape you. We're not even going to give you feedback. We're just going to give you the rules. Geez,
not very flexible.
If that with clients, we'd fail. Why aren't we going to fail with our students and with our psychotherapists in training? And I think we do fail. We just encourage rule-based rigidity, and that's the last thing we need. So my workshops are mostly oriented towards training psychological flexibility in a psychologically flexible way, and I do a lot of shaping, feedback, micro methods practice built on a base of experience, where the model makes sense of that, but doesn't so dominate that you get into with a human being and you're full of rules. Yeah. The wisdom traditions, there's an old Zen koan. You couldn't see the Buddha because of the flowers before your eyes. And, we dare not get in a position where we can't see the options for our clients and go there flexibly to move them towards what they came from us, to want from us, because of the models and flowers before our eyes and all the theories that have to be right because our mentor said they were right or because you're saying it's right. So let me, a thing you'd say if you were in supervision with me, all my students will confirm this. Every once in a while I say, by the way, just remember, psychological flexibility is wrong. Okay, just remember that. Because the last thing we need is somebody going in there with a model that they're true believers of and then beating their clients about the heads and ears. Be more humble. Open your ears. Open your eyes. Connect with your heart. And be guided by the science, but don't let even the scientific rules dominate over the experience in the room. And what your client's telling you is working. They're the ultimate arbiter. We take week-by-week measures in my supervision team, and they tell us how open did that session feel? How much did they feel judged? How important were their values? And if we're ever creating an inflexible environment in the name of trying to creating a flexible client, it's a full stop, dead stop, something's wrong. We want almost perfect scores from our clients that they felt accepted, not judged, attended to, that their values mattered, that I was consciously in the room with them, and that we were building the kind of life they wanted to do. So I've given you kind of a wild ride in that answer, and all these answers. I'm sorry. You're talking to a person who likes to talk.
Don't be sorry at all. Actually, I think you kind of answered the final question I wanted to ask you, which is what advice would you wish to have gotten when you were starting out as a psychotherapist? I think you went there.
Yeah, I think I did. I mean, I started there, the very first answer. And the advice I'd give is to be true to yourself, be one whole person, wear your science hat, but don't just wear it only. Don't let it slip down over your eyes. You can't even see through the hat. Apply these things to yourself. Remember that you're a person too, and so is your client. And let's see if we can keep our eye on the prize, which is creating a behavioral science more worthy of the challenge of the human condition. You keep your eye on that, your life as a psychotherapist and as a researcher and as an academic and as a person will move the ball down the street. And if we can all do that in our lives, we're doing a lot of good for the world.
Stephen, thank you so much for this. It was really great.
Thank you. 𝗔𝗹𝗲𝘅, thank you so much, and 𝗔𝗯🂫𝘂𝘁.